Many stories live between these Daytona walls, passed down through generations. The stories that live on become legend. And if the story of Tiny Lund weren't true, well, it'd be hard to believe. This is the true tall tale of a man named Tiny, an act of superhuman heroism in a Daytona 500 for the ages. DeWayne Tiny Lund was born in Iowa, but headed east to Cross, South Carolina, where he owned and operated a fish camp, which I'm assuming is a camp for fish. And by the way, the big dude driving, that's Tiny.
Every time Dad was successful, placed in a race, had any kind of winnings to bring home, he picked up a little more property. And the center of all that was always the fish camp.
When not piloting stock cars, Tiny was hooked on fishing.
He was a fisherman, man. He'd tell fishing stories. He told one time, he said he caught a fish so big, the shadow weighed 5 pounds.
Tiny was an overgrown baby, is what he was. He was the softest, hardest person you could ever meet in your life.
He's just a big old teddy bear, really. Always playing jokes, always picking people up, checking them around. He was just a big kid.
Jokester, prankster, fun-loving. That was Tiny. And his character, well, that was matched only by his physical stature.
Tiny was bigger than life. You know, he was about 6'6", about 285 pounds. He looked like the right defensive tackle for the Packers.
As fun as he was, Tiny was a tough son of a gun. One time, after a wreck at Charlotte, he spent a week in the hospital. 2 days later, he's back on the track.
Well, we had a little accident, and I spent last week in the hospital in traction. And so I don't know if I survive this track, well, I'm better shape than I think I am.
On the track, Tiny was a bit of a journeyman. A few top 5s, top 10s here and there, but nothing to write home about.
Tiny was a guy that was sort of struggling, as most drivers do when they come into the sport. It was obvious he had a lot of talent and was looking for an opportunity.
In 1963, Tiny traveled to Daytona. His career, it was running on empty.
He came to Daytona with 17 cents in his pocket, that's it. And he was hoping to find a ride while he was down here.
That's right, folks. He had no money and no car to win money. Tiny needed a miracle.
Marvin Panch had been the team driver for the Wood Brothers for about a year up to that time. And he was driving a specially prepared Maserati with a big Ford engine. And it was kind of a Frankenstein thing. You know, that kind of engine should not have been in that kind of car.
10 days prior to the Daytona 500, NASCAR star Marvin Panch took to the track in practice, looking to break a speed record. What followed is legend.
Unfortunately, it got airborne.
We saw Marvin's car pick itself up, turn itself over in the air.
The car starts flipping, lands right side up, and fire belches out.
Tiny took action. Instinctively, Tiny and 4 other men started to run towards the car.
We wanted to get to it fast. You could see it was on fire. We tried to pick it up, and about that time, the fire roared up. Woof! We dropped it, and I thought, he's a goner.
Going into a fire is probably the toughest thing you could ask a human being to do.
It looked for seconds there we were going to fail.
They say the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Giving up was not an option for Tiny Lund.
Tiny, being as strong as he was able to get that body out of the car and save his life.
6'5" and almost 300 pounds, Tiny lifted that burning Maserati and pulled Panch to safety.
All in all, I couldn't get out. I couldn't get out of the front. I couldn't get out of the back. The engine's sitting there on fire and it's squashed down. When it's flattened down, there's no glass left. You know, you can't get through a little hole. Those guys were real brave that saved me. If they sat down and thought about it, they probably wouldn't run in and do it. They just did it unconsciously. They just ran right into flames and did it.
Panch survived, but severe burns across his body were going to keep him from running in the 500.
So from his hospital bed, Marvin said, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if you put Tiny in the car because he helped me out?
Through Panch's misfortune, Tiny's opportunity came knocking in the form of the Wood Brothers' number 21 car.
He was kind of a hero, so the Woods boys said, hey, we need a driver, and what better than somebody that helped save our driver's life?
From the Daytona International Speedway in Daytona Beach, Florida, it's the 1963 running of the Daytona 500.
So to catch everyone back up to speed, an oversized journeyman racer travels to Daytona with no money and no car. He saves a man from a burning wreckage and is given a ride in the Great American Race. Man, that's incredible. It can't get any better, can it?
I figured that I had this chance. I mean, I never said to anybody how I felt, but that was what I told my wife.
Green flag is up. 200 laps or the 500 miles, and off they go.
Two cars were running away with the 1963 Daytona 500. Superstars and future Hall of Famers Fred Lorenzen and Ned Jarrett.
Fred Lorenzen had led most of the laps because I was drafting him and trying to help both of us to stay up front and pull away from everyone. And then all of a sudden, Lund got into the picture.
He wasn't quite as fast as Lorenzen was, but he drafted a lot.
Fred Lorenzen out there in front, and this may be by design. It may be that Tiny Lund wants him to get out there. It takes more fuel to break the wind. And Lund, staying in the suction of that car, naturally could conserve a little bit of fuel.
With 15 laps to go, Lorenzen, Jarrett, and Tiny were all battling for the lead. Who could outlast the others and go on to win the Daytona 500?
And the question would be, can they go the rest of the way with the fuel they've got in their tanks?
Lorenzen's crew wants him in the pits.
With only 7 laps to go, Lorenzen had to come to the pits for gas.
Lorenzen is coming into the pit area. Ned Jarrett has taken over the lead. Tiny Lund is in second place.
So now there were two, Tiny and superstar Ned Jarrett. 6 laps to go, still Tiny and Jarrett neck and neck. But with 5 laps left, Jarrett hits the pits.
There is Jarrett dropping down.
So that leaves Tiny in the lead. But can he make it?
They'd come up and ask us, well, when are the Wood Brothers coming in? And it got us to wondering if we could make it.
There's the white flag. Will Tiny's gas hold out?
Can he do the unthinkable and win the Daytona 500?
It's a strange feeling when you're that close to victory, a race that big. I just hoped that I wouldn't run out of gas, and I think I said a prayer or two in that last lap.
And it's Tiny Lund, the long shot.
So that guy that showed up a few days earlier with no money and no ride, well, he took down the superstars and won the Great American Race. Pretty unbelievable, huh? Well, it happened.
Tiny, you've just won $25,000. What will you folks do with it?
Pay our bills.
Pay our bills and add to our fishing camp.
Tiny, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Congratulations.
I say I was out of gas for the last 4 laps.
You were out of gas when you took the checkered flag?
Yes, sir.
Out of gas, taking the checkered flag. Words from a winner, Tiny Lund.
There's no larger bucket list box to check off than the Daytona 500. And Tiny, he did just that. Tiny and the 4 other men who saved Marvin Panch's life were awarded the Carnegie Medal for the acts of outstanding civilian heroism. At the time, it was the highest civilian medal given in the United States.
I'm sure it was nice validation for his general character. And the people that I spoke to at the Carnegie Foundation said that his profile was very similar to that of many other people who've won the award, when it's just ordinary people put into extraordinary circumstances and they just act. And so that, you know, makes me feel really good about who my dad is and was.
In 1975 at Talladega, Tiny Lund's story was cut short.
It is my sad duty to tell you that a very close friend and one of the great chargers of all time, Tiny Lund, has lost his life in a crash here at Talladega, Alabama this afternoon. Tiny was the 1963 Daytona 500-mile champion, then a relative unknown young driver from Iowa who saved the life of Marvin Panch. Lund, this giant of a man, bodily lifted the car off Panch and saved his life. He wrote one of the great stories in American sport. He won the Daytona 500 that year.
Following the 500, Tiny went on to win 4 other races in the Premier Series. He was also the Grand Touring Series champion in 1968, 1970, and 1971, and won the Grand National East Series championship in 1973. And later on, Tiny was inducted into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame and named one of NASCAR's 50 greatest drivers.
Thousands and thousands of people that's driven NASCAR races and made careers out of it, and then to be one of the top 50, I'd say was pretty good.
Although it ended in tragedy, the story of Tiny Lund will live on. A true hero who will never be forgotten. Many more stories have filled the chapters of Daytona, but there's certainly never been a miracle like this one.